My world had shrunk to the space between one ragged breath and the next. The herd, my herd for over a century, was a distant line of dust against the bleeding horizon. Their calls, once a comforting symphony, were now faint, mournful echoes of a life I could no longer be a part of. My legs, great pillars that had once shaken the very earth, now trembled with a deep, unyielding weakness. Each step was a negotiation with gravity, a battle I was destined to lose. The sun, a relentless eye in the sky, baked the cracked mud beneath my feet and drew out what little moisture remained in my ancient hide. I was old. Older than the tallest cycads, older than the memories of the last great fire. My skin, a tapestry of grey wrinkles and dark green patches, was scarred with the stories of 1,000 seasons. But stories are for the living, and my story was drawing to a close. I could feel the finality in the hollow ache of my bones, in the way my colossal heart labored to send life through my veins. My destination was not chosen, but inevitable, the great river. It was the lifeblood of this land, a place of beginnings and, for me, a place for an end. I lumbered forward, a ghost of the giant I once was, driven by the last flickering ember of instinct. The sounds of the world were muted, as if I were already listening from a great distance. The chirping of smaller creatures, the buzz of insects, the rustle of dry ferns, all of it faded into a dull hum. My focus was singular, the shimmering silver ribbon in the distance. Water. A final drink. A final piece. The bank was slick with mud, a treacherous slope for one so unsteady. I lowered my long neck, my head feeling heavier than a mountain, and dipped my snout into the cool, life-giving current. The water was a fleeting comfort. As I drank, a tremor ran through my body, a final, violent shudder. My front legs buckled. There was no strength left to fight it. With a groan that was less a sound and more a vibration of the earth itself, I surrendered. I slid down the bank, the mud giving way, and plunged into the cold embrace of the great river. The world dissolved into a silent, swirling green. My lungs burned for a moment, a final protest, before a strange tranquility settled over me. Darkness seeped into the edges of my vision. This was it. The end. But as my consciousness faded, a new light bloomed in the abyss. It was not the sun. It was something else, something ancient and alive within the water itself. It wrapped around me, a soft, vibrant energy that seeped into my very being, rewriting the final chapter of my story before it could even end. I awoke to the gentle lapping of water against my skin. But it was not my skin. Not the one I had known. Gone was the frail, wrinkled hide, the canvas of my decay. In its place was a sleek, powerful form, a deep blue-gray like the river at midnight. I pushed myself up, my limbs moving with a strength I hadn't felt in decades. There was no ache, no trembling, only a quiet, humming energy that resonated deep within me. I stood on the riverbank, a creature reborn, and saw my reflection in the water's surface. My eyes, once dim embers, now burned with a soft, cyan luminescence. Faint, intricate patterns glowed with the same inner light, tracing paths along my long neck and powerful flanks, pulsing in rhythm with a heartbeat I hadn't realized was now so strong. I was new. But the memories of the old one, the weary giant, remained. I felt his sorrow, his loneliness, his final, fading breath. And yet, I felt something more. A connection. I lowered my head to drink, more out of instinct than thirst. As my snout touched the river, I felt not just the coolness of the water, but the river itself. I felt its currents, its depth, the life teeming within it, the very pulse of its journey from the mountains to the sea. It was a part of me. And I was a part of it. Without thought, I focused on that connection. The water before me began to swirl. A small whirlpool formed, dancing at my command, its motion dictated by my will alone. I lifted my head in shock, and a perfect sphere of water, shimmering and crystalline, lifted from the river and hovered in the air before my glowing eyes. It held its shape, defying gravity, a liquid jewel suspended by my silent command. This power, it was the river's gift. The gift of my strange rebirth. I released my focus, and the sphere collapsed, splashing back into the hole. A sense of purpose, vast and deep as the river itself, began to fill the void left by my old life. I was no longer just a creature destined to wander, eat, and die. I was something else. I turned my gaze from the river to the land beyond. And for the first time, I saw it not just through my eyes, but through the water's countless eyes. I felt the dryness of the soil, the thirst of the wilting ferns, the desperation of creatures huddled around dwindling, stagnant pools. The land was suffering from a great drought. The great river was the only bastion of life, and even its tributaries were beginning to run dry. My new senses screamed with the silent pain of a thirsty world. And I realized my second chance at life was not just for me. It was for them all. I followed the great river, my new senses guiding me. I could feel the life it sustained, a vibrant network of energy. But I could also feel a blockage, a point of deep distress upstream. A place where the river's flow was being choked, its life force hoarded. The land grew more desolate the further I traveled. The air grew thick with a tension that was more than just the heat of the drought. It was fear. I saw it in the way smaller creatures scattered into the parched undergrowth, not from me, but from the direction I was headed. I heard it in the unnerving silence that had replaced the natural chorus of the wild. Soon, the river narrowed, flowing into a large, deep basin surrounded by high, rocky cliffs. And there, I saw the cause of the land's suffering. A Spinosaurus. But this was no ordinary predator. It was a monster, a titan of its kind, far larger than any I had ever seen. Its scales were a dark, muddy red, crisscrossed with black stripes. A massive, tattered sail, torn and scarred, rose from its back like a broken banner. One of its eyes was a milky, blind white, and a jagged scar ran the length of its immense, crocodile-like snout. It lay partially submerged in the basin, a cruel king on a liquid throne, guarding the water as if it were a personal treasure. It had effectively dammed the river's main flow, allowing only a trickle to pass beyond its lair. Smaller dinosaurs lingered at the basin's edge, their thirst-crazed eyes fixed on the water, but they dared not approach. They were held at bay by the tyrant's sheer, menacing presence. I watched as a brave, or perhaps foolish, iguanodon crept toward the water's edge, its movement slow and submissive. Before it could even touch the water with its tongue, the Spinosaurus erupted from the basin. The water exploded outwards as the beast lunged, its powerful jaws clamping down on the herbivore's neck with a sickening crunch. It was a display of brutal, unnecessary violence. Not a hunt for food, but an execution for daring to drink. The tyrant tossed the broken body aside and let out a guttural, terrifying roar that echoed off the cliffs, a declaration of its absolute dominion. The other thirsty dinosaurs scattered in terror. I stood on the ridge, unseen, and felt a cold fury rise within me. This was not the natural way. This was not the balance of life and death. This was greed. This was a sickness that was poisoning the land. The river's energy pulsed within me, a silent thrum of indignation that mirrored my own. The old Brachiosaurus would have trembled and fled. He would have accepted this as the world's harsh reality. But I was not him. I was the river's chosen, its guardian. And this tyranny would not stand. I did not need to roar or make a grand display. My presence alone was a challenge. I began my descent into the basin, my heavy footsteps echoing like war drums. The Spinosaurus watched my approach, its single yellow eye narrowed with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. It saw me not as a threat, but as an arrogant fool. Another meal, larger than the last, willingly walking into its lair. It slid back into the deeper water, submerging until only the top of its head and its tattered sail were visible, a predator lying in wait. I did not stop at the water's edge. I walked straight into the basin, the water rising up my powerful legs. I felt the river's energy surge into me, welcoming me, empowering me. The cool water felt like armor. This water is for all, I projected, not as a sound, but as a feeling, a wave of pure intent that washed over the basin. You will not hoard it. The Spinosaurus responded with a blast of violent thought, a wave of pure predatory rage. "This is my river. My water. All who drink, do so with my permission, or they die." Then, it attacked. It did not charge from the front. It was a creature of the water, and it used it to its advantage. It dove, disappearing beneath the surface. The water remained still for a tense moment. I focused, extending my senses, feeling the currents, trying to pinpoint its location. It was fast. The water to my left exploded upwards as the Spinosaurus lunged, jaws agape, aiming for my neck. The old me would have been torn apart. But I was not the old me. I reacted on pure instinct. I whipped my head to the side and simultaneously pulled on the water around me. A thick, powerful wall of water erupted from the river's surface, rising like a liquid shield. The Spinosaurus slammed into the shield, its teeth sinking into churning water instead of my flesh. The force of the impact sent a shockwave across the basin. The tyrant recoiled, shaking its head in disbelief, its yellow eye wide with shock. It had never encountered such a thing. Water itself had struck back. Before it could recover, I pressed my advantage. I focused, pulling a massive tendril of water from the river. It rose into the air, twisting and solidifying into a colossal water whip, glistening in the sun. With a swing of my neck, I sent the whip crashing down onto the Spinosaurus. It struck its back with the force of a falling tree, eliciting a roar of genuine pain and fury from the tyrant. It was thrown off balance, stumbling in the water. It looked at me now with something new in its eye. Not just anger. Fear. It had met a power it did not understand. It let out one more defiant, frustrated roar before diving deep and disappearing, retreating to the darkest depths of its basin to nurse its wounds and its pride. I had won the first skirmish. But I knew this was far from over. The tyrant was gone, but the problem remained. The crude dam of rocks and fallen trees still choked the river, holding its life-giving water hostage. Leaving the basin, I walked to the obstruction. It was a formidable barrier, assembled with the Spinosaurus's brute strength. For any normal creature, it would be impossible to dismantle. But I did not need brute strength. I had the river itself on my side. I closed my eyes, sinking my consciousness deep into the water. I felt every crack and crevice in the dam, the pressure of the water pushing against it, the way the current was forced into a frustrated, narrow trickle. I extended my will, not as a battering ram, but as a key unlocking a complicated lock. I instructed the water. I urged the currents to focus their power on the weakest points of the dam. At first, nothing seemed to happen. But then, a small jet of water shot through a gap between two massive logs. Then another, and another. I encouraged the river to push, to pry, to work its way into the heart of the structure. The water swirled and churned, forming powerful, concentrated vortexes that began to grind away at the mud and debris holding the dam together. A deep groaning sound came from the barrier as the immense pressure found its release. Logs began to shift. Rocks started to tumble. With a final, focused push of my will, I commanded a massive wave to rise from the basin behind the dam and crash down upon it. The sound was like thunder. The dam of the tyrant shattered. Wood splintered, rocks were tossed aside like pebbles, and with a triumphant roar, the great river was free. A torrent of fresh, clean water surged downstream, pouring into the dry, waiting riverbed. I watched it go, a wave of life rushing to heal the thirsty land. A profound sense of rightness settled over me. This was my purpose. I turned and began my journey back, following the path of the newly freed water. The change was almost immediate. The trickle of life became a steady flow, then a healthy, flowing river. The parched earth drank deeply. Creatures of all kinds, who had been hiding in fear and dehydration, emerged from the shadows. They came to the banks, dipping their heads and drinking the sweet, cool water. They looked at me as I passed, this strange, glowing Brachiosaurus. There was no fear in their eyes. There was awe. There was gratitude. I was not a king, not a tyrant demanding tribute. I was a part of the landscape, a guardian who had restored the balance. I had brought them life, and in their quiet reverence, they gave my new existence a meaning the old me could never have imagined. My work was not done. Freeing the river was only the beginning. The drought was a deep wound upon the land, and one renewed artery was not enough to heal it. I could feel the thirst of the high plateaus, the desperation of the forests far from the river's reach. They too needed water. I found a quiet, open plain and stood beneath the vast, empty sky. For the first time, I would try to do more than just control the water before me. I would try to call the water from the heavens. I closed my eyes and focused, not on the river, but on the air. I felt the minuscule, scattered droplets of moisture suspended in the atmosphere, a vast, invisible river flowing high above the world. It was thin and dispersed, but it was there. I reached out with my consciousness, a shepherd gathering a scattered flock. I gently pulled the particles of moisture together, drawing on the memory of clouds, on the feeling of rain I knew from my long-forgotten youth. It was the most difficult thing I had ever done. The strain was immense. My bioluminescent patterns flared, glowing with an almost blinding intensity. A soft, blue-white aura enveloped my entire body. Slowly, something began to change. The clear blue sky above me began to haze over. Wisps of white appeared from nothing, coalescing, growing. A small cloud began to form directly above me. Then another, and another. They merged, growing larger, heavier, their bellies darkening from white to a deep, promising gray. The air grew cool and heavy with the scent of ozone and impending rain. Other dinosaurs on the plain stopped their foraging and looked up, their instincts telling them of the coming shift in weather. They stared in my direction, at the glowing giant from whom this impossible weather seemed to be originating. Then, the first drop fell. It landed on my snout, a cool kiss from the sky. Another followed, then a dozen, then a torrent. Rain began to fall. A gentle, life-giving shower that I had summoned from a cloudless sky. I opened my eyes and looked up, letting the cool water wash over my new skin. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated joy. The thirsty earth drank it in. The withered plants seemed to sigh in relief. The other dinosaurs lifted their heads to the sky, letting the rain wash away the dust and despair of the long drought. I had done it. I was more than the river's guardian. I was a force of nature itself. I knew the tyrant Spinosaurus was not truly defeated. It would be nursing its wound, its hatred growing. But as the rain fell around me, I felt a new level of confidence. Let it come. I would be ready. Days turned into weeks. I became a wanderer, a bringer of rain. I traveled the Great Plains, climbed the foothills of the jagged mountains, and walked the edges of the dense, silent jungles. Wherever I went, I brought the water with me. I would find the driest, most desperate lands and call down the clouds, a slow, deliberate process of healing. I would clear blocked streams with gentle, insistent currents. I would even draw up water from deep within the earth, creating new springs where none had existed before. Legends began to spread among the creatures of the land. They spoke of a giant spirit, a ghost of the clouds with glowing eyes, who walked the earth and commanded the storms. They no longer saw a Brachiosaurus. They saw an answer to their suffering. They would watch me from a respectful distance as I worked my will on the weather, their collective or a silent encouragement. This new life was more fulfilling than my century-old existence. Then, I was just surviving. Now, I was living for a purpose. But in the back of my mind, I could always feel the cold, hateful presence festering in the northern basin. The Spinosaurus was not idle. Its rage was a festering wound, and it was growing stronger, its hatred focusing into a singular, malevolent point. I could feel it through the water, a subtle, discordant vibration in the river's flow. It was preparing for something. It was adapting. One day, as I was coaxing a spring to life in the shadow of a great mesa, the feeling changed. The hateful thrum in the water intensified, pulsing with a new, dark energy. It was moving. And it was not alone. I turned my gaze north, my senses stretching out through the network of water that now connected my entire world. The Spinosaurus had left its basin. And it had gathered allies. It had preyed on the desperation of the drought, recruiting other large predators to its cause, a pack of cunning Allosauruses and a pair of brutish Carnotauruses with their distinctive horns. They were drawn to its power and its promise of a world where the strong would control all resources. They were an army, a force of destruction, and they were marching south. Their target was clear. Me. They were following the river, a path of conquest aimed at its heart. The tyrant wasn't just coming to reclaim its stolen water. It was coming to destroy the symbol of hope that had replaced it. The time for gentle healing was over. The time for war was at hand. I turned away from the new spring, my task of creation interrupted by the coming wave of destruction. I began my own journey north to intercept them. This would not be a skirmish in a hidden basin. This would be a battle for the soul of the land itself, fought on the banks of the great river. The meeting point was a wide, open floodplain, where the river bent in a great, slow curve. It was a natural arena, and it was there I chose to make my stand. I arrived first and waited. I did not need to hide. I stood in the center of the floodplain, a silent challenge. The earth began to tremble long before I saw them. Then they emerged from the tree line, a tide of teeth and claws. The Spinosaurus was at their head, larger and more menacing than I remembered. Its wound had healed into a dark, ugly scar, a permanent reminder of its hatred for me. Its predator allies fanned out, their hungry eyes fixed on me. They stopped at a distance, the river's main channel separating our forces. The tyrant looked at me, and I felt its thoughts, no longer just rage, but a cold, calculating cunning. It had learned from our first encounter. It would not fight me in the deep water again. It bellowed a command, and its army charged. The Allosauruses and Carnotauruses plunged into the shallower parts of the river, splashing and roaring as they crossed to engage me on my side of the bank. The Spinosaurus, however, remained on the opposite side. It was a classic pincer strategy. Use its minions to distract and wound me, while the true threat waited for an opening. As the carnivores closed in, I planted my feet firmly on the ground. I drew upon the river, and the water around me came to life. Two massive serpents of water, each larger than an Allosaurus, rose from the river. Their forms were solid and powerful, their eyes glowing with a faint cyan light that mirrored my own. They were extensions of my will. The predators hesitated for a second, taken aback by this display of raw elemental power. That second was all I needed. I sent the water serpents crashing into their ranks. One serpent coiled around a Carnotaurus, its immense pressure cracking bone. The other lashed out, its head striking an Allosaurus and sending it flying back into the river. The battle was joined. I stood like a fortress, directing my water constructs. They were a perfect defense, intercepting the attackers before they could reach me. But the predators were numerous and relentless. While my serpents were engaged with some, others scrambled onto the bank and lunged for me. An Allosaurus leaped onto my back, its claws scrabbling for purchase on my sleek hide. I bellowed and bucked, throwing it off, then stomped a foot into the ground. The wet soil beneath the remaining attackers turned to quicksand, a thick, grasping mud that trapped them, pulling them down. I was holding them off. But it was taking a tremendous amount of energy to control so many different things at once. And across the river, the Spinosaurus watched. It was waiting. It was learning my tactics, my limits. Then it made its move. It didn't cross the river. It began to smash the riverbank with its powerful tail, tearing down trees and sending an avalanche of earth and rock into the water. It was trying to dam the river again, right here, in the middle of our battle. It was trying to cut me off from my source of power. The tyrant's tactic was clever and brutal. While I was occupied with its minions, it worked tirelessly to sever my connection to the river. The flow of water began to slow, the river's powerful voice in my mind weakening. My water serpents began to lose their form, becoming less solid, their attacks less potent. The predators trapped in the mud found the ground hardening beneath them as the water receded. My power was being strangled at its source. The Spinosaurus let out a triumphant roar as the makeshift dam was completed, reducing the mighty river to a sluggish stream. It then turned and waded across the now shallow water, its yellow eye burning with confidence. The final confrontation was here. Its remaining allies, freed from my elemental assault, regrouped and prepared to attack me again, hemming me in. I was surrounded, and my greatest weapon was gone. The Spinosaurus loomed before me, a mountain of muscle and malice. "Now, river ghost," it projected, its thoughts dripping with scorn, "what will you do without your water?" It lunged. I met its charge, not with magic, but with the raw, physical strength of my new body. My head crashed into its side, the impact shaking the floodplain. The tyrant was immensely strong, but I was a living fortress. It snapped at my neck, and I countered by whipping my own massive tail, forcing it back. Its minions charged from the flanks. An Allosaurus leaped for my leg. I couldn't summon a whirlpool to stop it, so I did the only thing I could. I stomped. My foot came down on the Allosaurus, crushing it into the mud. A Carnotaurus charged, horns lowered. I pivoted, letting the charge glance off my shoulder, and swung my neck like a club, smashing it to the ground. It was a brutal, desperate melee. I was a match for any of the smaller predators, but the Spinosaurus was my equal in strength. And I was one against many. They swarmed me, their claws and teeth tearing at my hide. My sleek, blue-gray skin was gashed, and for the first time since my rebirth, I felt pain. The Spinosaurus saw its chance. While I was occupied, it charged and sank its massive teeth deep into my shoulder. A wave of agony shot through me. My vision flashed white. I roared in pain and fury, but the tyrant held on, its powerful neck muscles working to bring me down. Was this it? Had I come this far only to be torn apart by this monster? No. The river was diminished, but it was not gone. My power was weakened, but it was not extinguished. The water was not just in the river. It was in the sky. It was in the earth. It was in me. With the last of my strength, I ignored the pain in my shoulder and reached for the sky. I pulled on that invisible river of moisture in the air, the same one I had used to bring the rain. This time, I wasn't gentle. This was a desperate, violent rip. The clouds above the floodplain began to swirl into a massive, dark vortex. The sky turned black in an instant. Lightning, tinged with a cyan glow, cracked across the clouds. The Spinosaurus looked up, its confidence finally shattering into pure terror. It had cut me off from the river, but it had forgotten. I command all water. And then, the heavens opened. It was not rain. It was a deluge, a solid wall of water that crashed down upon the floodplain with the force of 1,000 waterfalls. The makeshift dam the Spinosaurus had built was obliterated in seconds. The great river, reawakened and reinforced by the storm, surged over its banks, flooding the entire arena. The shallow mud field became a raging, swirling lake. The smaller predators were swept away, their roars turning to panicked cries as the torrent consumed them. They were washed downstream, their alliance broken, their battle lust extinguished by the raw fury of the storm. But the Spinosaurus, a creature of the water, held its ground. It dug its claws into the mud, fighting the current, its hatred for me overriding its fear. This was our battle, and it would end here. Water swirled around my legs, and I felt my power return, magnified 100-fold by the storm I now commanded. The gash in my shoulder throbbed, but the pain was a distant thing. You cannot win, I projected, my thought now a booming thunderclap that echoed in the tyrant's mind. This element is mine. I raised my head, and the floodwaters around the Spinosaurus rose up, forming a massive, churning whirlpool. It roared in defiance, thrashing its powerful tail, fighting against the vortex that sought to pull it down. It was incredibly strong, and for a moment, it seemed it might break free. But I was the storm. I was the flood. I was the river. I focused all my will, all my pain, all my purpose into one final act. The whirlpool intensified, the water spinning so fast it became a liquid drill. At its center, I opened a void, a bottomless pit in the riverbed, pulling mud, rock, and water down into the depths of the earth. The Spinosaurus could fight the current, but it could not fight the abyss. With a final, terrified shriek that was swallowed by the storm, the tyrant lost its footing. It was dragged down, thrashing and clawing, into the heart of the vortex. The earth swallowed it whole. I then calmed the storm. The whirlpool subsided, and the ground sealed over the Spinosaurus's watery grave. The rain softened to a gentle shower. The floodwaters receded, flowing back into the river's channel. Silence returned to the floodplain, broken only by the soft patter of rain and the gentle flow of the restored river. The tyrant was gone. The balance was restored. I stood there for a long time, my body aching, my energy spent. I looked at my reflection in a wide pool of rainwater. I saw the scars of the battle on my blue-gray skin, but I also saw the calm, glowing cyan eyes of a guardian who had protected his home. My old life, that slow march toward death, seemed like a distant dream. I had been given a second chance, not just to live, but to give life. My journey was not over. The land still had wounds to heal. But now, there was peace. I turned and began my long, slow walk, following the river, my constant companion. The gentle rain washed the blood from my hide, and with every step, I felt the world breathing a sigh of relief. And so was I.